Picture this, it's 1569, and Queen Elizabeth I is facing a threat that could literally rip her kingdom apart and toss her from the throne. This was the Northern Revolt, and it was the first, huge, bloody test of her entire reign. Today, we're going to break down how she survived it.
So let me start by asking you a question. If you were a king or queen and people rose up against you, how would you absolutely, totally crush that rebellion?
Well, you're about to find out. Because back in 1569, Queen Elizabeth I was about to give a masterclass in exactly how it's done. This is the story of how she stared down a massive plot that could have ended her reign before it ever really got going. To get what happened, you have to understand that Elizabethan England was basically a pressure cooker just waiting to blow. You have this new Protestant queen, right? And her whole claim to the throne is built on this fragile new law, the Act of Supremacy, which says she's the head of the church. For all the powerful Catholic families in the country, this wasn't just politics, it was an attack on God himself.
And at the very heart of all this tension were two incredibly powerful women. On one side, you've got Elizabeth, who a lot of Catholics didn't even think was a legitimate queen, being the daughter of Anne Boleyn. And on the other side, there's her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. She's a devout Catholic, she has a really strong claim to the English throne, and, wouldn't you know it, she's a prisoner right there in England. Her being there was, as one source put it, a total disaster for Elizabeth. She was a living, breathing symbol for anyone who wanted a Catholic back on the throne.
So, who was actually gutsy enough to challenge the queen? Well, say hello to the Northern Earls. And look, these guys weren't just some random rabble-rousers. They were some of the most powerful nobles in the entire country. And they felt like everything, their power, their influence, their whole way of life, was just slipping through their fingers under this new queen.
Okay, so who are the main players here? The whole thing was led by two big northern nobles, Thomas Percy, the Earl of Northumberland, and Charles Neville, the Earl of Westmoreland. They were the muscle. But the guy they were really counting on to lead them, the potential king-to-be, was Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk.
You can kind of think of the Duke of Norfolk's whole deal like a 16th century social media profile. What is he like? Well, Catholicism, and the idea of marrying Mary, Queen of Scots. What does he dislike? Small pensions from the Queen, and, maybe a little prophetically, execution. He was the highest-ranking noble in all of England, and his ambition was a seriously dangerous spark.
Which brings us to the big question, right? Why? Why on earth would these men who had everything to lose, their lands, their titles, their actual lives, risk it all on high treason?
It really all boiled down to three things. First, Mary was the perfect Catholic figurehead, a ready-made replacement queen. Second, for these super devout Catholics, Elizabeth just wasn't their rightful ruler. Plain and simple. And finally, there was this huge north-south divide. These lords up in the north felt totally ignored by London. Like all their traditional power was being snatched up and handed to Protestant Southerners that the Queen liked better.
So, the plan was as simple as it was audacious. Overthrow Queen Elizabeth, bust Mary, Queen of Scots out of prison, and stick her on the throne. And the cherry on top? The Duke of Norfolk would marry Mary, making himself the real power behind the crown.
But like so many ambitious heists, this one went spectacularly wrong. The planning was, well, it was shaky, and they were about to find out that their opponent was way more ruthless than they ever imagined. The whole thing started to fall apart, and fast. The plot was cooked up in the summer of '69, but by the autumn, Elizabeth's spy network was already onto them. She summoned the Duke of Norfolk to London for a little chat, which, smartly, he dodged. But that sent the Northern Earls into a total panic. They figured it was now or never. In November, this really weird signal went out. Across the north, church bells started ringing backwards. The revolt was on.
And for a hot minute, it actually looked like it might work. They scraped together an army of about 4,000 men and marched on the city of Durham. They stormed the cathedral, ripped up the English Bible and the Protestant prayer books, and held a big Catholic mass. It must have felt like victory was right around the corner.
But that feeling didn't last long. Their momentum slammed right into a wall of reality. Elizabeth didn't just respond. She unleashed absolute, overwhelming force. Suddenly, the rebels found themselves looking at a professional army of 12,000 loyal troops marching straight for them. They were outnumbered 3-1.
And you can just imagine the reaction from the rebel earls when they heard the news that a massive royal army was coming for them. The best way to sum it up is probably this historical interpretation. Oh, pants. They had no real plan for this. They had no strategy. The backup they were hoping for from other countries never showed up. The rebellion just collapsed.
So, the rebellion itself was pretty short-lived. But the Queen's revenge? All that was just getting started. This was the moment Elizabeth showed everyone the cold, hard steel she had beneath the surface. This was her iron fist.
The leaders, of course, tried to run for it. The Earl of Westmoreland actually made it to Belgium, where he lived out the rest of his life and died broke. The Earl of Northumberland? Not so lucky. He ran to Scotland, but the Scots sold him right back to Elizabeth. He was marched to the city of York and publicly executed.
But the Queen's justice wasn't just for the fancy earls. She ordered the public execution of more than 700 regular rebels, right in their own villages for everyone to see. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a horrifying message, written in blood to anyone else who might even think about defying her.
And what about Mary, the woman at the center of this whole mess? She was immediately moved to Coventry, deep in the middle of England, as far from a coast and any chance of rescue as possible. Her relatively comfortable imprisonment was officially over.
So you might be thinking, wow, that seems excessive. Why was the response so incredibly brutal? Well, it all comes back to that one law, the Act of Supremacy. Remember, that's the law that made the Queen the head of the church. So this revolt wasn't just a political disagreement. It was a direct attack on the very foundation of Elizabeth's power. In her mind, it had to be crushed without a single shred of mercy.
Which really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Elizabeth's reign would go on for another 30 years, full of incredible highs and lows. But was this moment, this swift, ruthless, absolute victory over the first great threat from within her own kingdom, the moment a young, vulnerable queen finally became a legend we all remember?